It's funny. People get married and they're like, hey, we're going to have a year to ourselves. It's going to be great. And then based on our timing, we want their birth date to be this, so we're going to wait until this date. You don't have that kind of control.
It's true. Some people make plans to have children around their schedules, and, well, it works out fine. Many others, however, learn quickly that the journey of family building can sometimes be one with obstacles and roadblocks. Today, we're going to hear Sonya's experience. She and her husband started trying when they were 29 years old, and 9 months later, they received a diagnosis.
It was that beautiful but also frustrating unexplained infertility.
Unexplained infertility isn't the worst news. By definition, it means that they ran tests and all of the tests came back normal. That's good news. But of course, not finding a cause for the problem is not the same as there being no problem. So they moved ahead with a straightforward treatment, intrauterine insemination, where sperm is placed directly into the uterus using a small catheter in the hopes of fertilizing an egg.
They thought an IUI probably would be fine. There was no motility issues with the sperm, but they thought, you could be a good case for an IUI. So that's the path that we took originally. Initially, I was relieved. Like, hey, maybe it's just a timing thing. Maybe we just need a little intervention. Like, we are going to get pregnant so quickly after this. So at first I was excited because there was nothing wrong, but the longer you are on that journey, you want something. You want something to solve that says, this is the issue, we're going to do this, and then you're going to have a baby, right? And that wasn't the case at first.
Yeah, that's a fairly common thing that we hear about unexplained infertility. Initially, it's good news, as that means nothing is showing to be a problem, and frankly, that means you might not even need IVF, which is more expensive and invasive than IUI. But as the initial efforts don't work, the unexplained infertility diagnosis starts to be more of a frustration than anything. And sometimes, as we'll hear today, the diagnosis itself can change as different treatments reveal issues that weren't originally detected. For Sonya, IUI turned out to be a dead end.
We did IUIs back to back to back. We did about 4 IUIs before we said we're wasting money, right? Even though it's a fraction, it's still hundreds of dollars. I think it's time to move to IVF. And I remember being in denial about it. Like, this wasn't supposed to be us. This wasn't supposed to be our journey, our story. Like, we're healthy, we're relatively young.
The transition from IUI to IVF can be a taxing one, financially and emotionally.
The emotions that I had then, I thought were probably pretty intense, just, sad. I can't believe this is us. And we at that time had no benefits. So, the dollars were coming out of our pockets. So there is that stress and that kind of that guilt of like, he's totally fine. It's got to be me, even though it says unexplained. And now we're signing up for this ticket item that's $15,000, $20,000 out of pocket that we could be spending other places if our body did the normal thing that it's supposed to do, that all of our friends have had no issues doing, right?
Challenging as it was, the couple moved ahead with IVF. IVF is a treatment option for infertility that comes with very good success rates. And of course, the goal with any IVF cycle is to have a healthy baby. But IVF is also an opportunity for your doctor to learn a few things that they weren't able to look into during the initial rounds of testing. It's during IVF where an unexplained infertility diagnosis might actually change into something else.
The very first protocol, we took all the shots and we were excited to, we're monitoring each day, and you don't really have expectations of like what's normal, what's not normal. And I wasn't responding well to the medicine. And I remember them calling me to say, hey, we're going to cancel this cycle after we spent $5,000 out of pocket on medicine. We're not going to do an egg retrieval. You haven't made enough eggs for it to make sense financially for you to go through the egg retrieval process, because that's really expensive. And that was a big, like, how could this happen, right? Like, you're supposed to pay money and go do an egg retrieval and then do a transfer. So it's interesting, IVF, there's so many steps of the process. You've got to respond to the medicine. You've got to, have enough eggs to retrieve. You've got to have the quality to be able to, what are the sizes? What's the maturity to be able to fertilize? And, then there's are they going to turn into blasts? There's so much in in the process, every step of the way of an IVF protocol.
The first cycle was canceled, and the second cycle didn't go much better. The embryo transfer didn't work out, and they had no embryos left over.
I always think about, like, you expect, all right, fine, I'm going to pay this, I'm going to do this, and then it's not 100% going to work.
In total, they did 5 rounds of IVF at that clinic without any positive results.
And at that point, I was physically, emotionally, financially, I was just at a breaking point.
It was here, nearing her breaking point, where Sonya discussed a different option with her doctor.
I'm talking to my doctor. I'm like at a breaking point. Where do we go from here? Hey, I researched there's this clinic that takes on a lot of very hard cases. So I asked my doctor, do you think it would be beneficial? I mean, knowing my case at this point, we're thinking I have ovarian reserve because I don't produce a lot and my quality is not great. What are your thoughts around that? And he was gracious. He's like, listen, I want you guys to have success. I don't have any more tricks in my tool bag. I would recommend seeking him, and if they're accepting patients. So I really appreciated that.
Switching doctors in between rounds of IVF can sometimes be a bit inconvenient. And there are certainly instances where you really are better off staying with your doctor. After all, they're the ones who are learning your body. And it would be a shame to start from zero with someone new in some cases. But in Sonya's case, a change made a lot of sense. Now that she was diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve, not unexplained infertility, it would increase her chances if she went to a clinic that specialized in diminished ovarian reserve. So they switched to this new clinic for another round of IVF.
And that was our 6th cycle. And at that point, that's when I told my husband, this is the last time I have inside of me. This is the last time I can go through this. And it worked. And it worked.
I love her excitement there. After 5 rounds of IVF with no pregnancy, the 6th cycle brought them to their goal.
I remember we were on a walk with our dog and we got the call from the clinic. And it was one of those, like, I don't even want to answer it. They're going to tell me it didn't work. They're going to tell me it didn't work. And it worked. And it's kind of an unreal moment, like, never had that call before. We had, we've done 6 protocols and that's the first time we got that call. And we immediately we got to FaceTime our parents. We got to FaceTime our parents because the funny thing about IVF, there's no we'll do a reveal, a timed, some sort of surprise. Everyone's waiting on that call. Everybody knows what you've been doing, right? So we told our parents right away.
6 rounds of IVF adds up. Fortunately, Sonya's husband had a benefit at work that helped cover the medications, which was a significant financial help. But nevertheless, financially, they felt the strain.
When the pen comes to paper and you start paying for it, the stress goes up. So mentally, you're doing it, but now we're handing over the credit card and now we're handing over, right? So it's, I remember leading up to the payment days, it getting really stressful.
Now that was the ending to that story, but it wasn't the end to Sonya's family building story.
We were talking about, as soon as we were pregnant, we were talking about what it was going to take to have a second, just knowing what we had gone through and, again, the financial piece of it. And I remember we had talked about, I would want to go back to where we had success, right? I don't want to stay local. I don't want to try a different clinic, even local. I want to go where we know we have had success. And that's more expensive than some local clinics.
Yes, for Sonya, it was the new clinic that really made the biggest difference. And there are a couple of things you should know about that clinic. First of all, it's a very well-known clinic in Colorado called CCRM, a place that pioneered a lot of what they do today in modern IVF. And second, Sonya doesn't live in Colorado, which meant that she had to travel for IVF. And that meant that IVF would be even more expensive. The question was, how would they pay for a 7th round of IVF? And then they got an answer.
So I remember being pregnant at an HR summit, and they were announcing some of the changes that were going to be happening in the next year to our benefits, and that they were adding a fertility benefit. And I remember when this was being announced, I remember my director of recruiting at the time looking across the table at me, and we both smiled at each other because she knew what I had gone through. And I know that she was part of the discussions that brought in this benefit. And I remember thinking, this is awesome. And it was an amazing benefit. It wasn't just, it was like a one-time, lifetime, wherever you go, it's going to cover. And that's I can't even describe the message that sent to me as an employee on how Delta Dental was investing in me as a person.
Yes, as you just heard, Sonya works for a company called Delta Dental. It's America's largest dental insurance carrier. And the benefit that she now had access to was the progeny benefit. I'm going to spare you the progeny sales pitch here, but as she said, progeny is a really amazing benefit that, among other things, will bring down the cost of IVF considerably. But there was one potential issue that still gave Sonya pause. The progeny benefit works with a provider network. So to use the benefit, you need an in-network doctor and clinic. And of course, Sonya wasn't going to budge from her doctor at CCRM in Colorado. So it all came down to one question. Is her doctor in network?
And then we did some research, and it did cover that clinic. So it was a big deal that progeny was able to be in network for the clinic that was our first choice.
Yes, Progeny partners with all the best clinics around the country. It's another reason that it's such a great benefit. So with the benefit in hand, they knew that they'd be able to try again when they were ready. Some time passed, they welcomed their new baby into the world, and then sometime later, they were ready to try again. They did another IVF cycle with CCRM. This one resulted in one embryo, but unfortunately, this time the embryo transfer didn't result in pregnancy.
And I remember thinking, wait a second, this wasn't going to be our story, right? CCRM has made it happen for us. So we actually ended up having to go back and doing another egg retrieval. I don't have frozen embryos after everything, right? So I'm always, every protocol, going back in and doing another egg retrieval before a transfer. That time we got 2 blasts, both genetically normal. We transferred one and she took. So this is our first time ever. We have one on ice. So that was really obviously thrilling.
Sonya expressed a lot of gratitude in our call. She's grateful for the team at CCRM in Colorado. She's grateful that they were in a position to do multiple rounds of IVF. It's not lost on her that these treatments aren't accessible to everyone. And she also expressed gratitude to her employer, Delta Dental, for providing the benefit that removed the stress and kept these possibilities open.
I actually have told them this multiple times, just because I am so thankful that they added this benefit to their employees. They truly, Delta Dental truly cares about their employees beyond work, their personal life, their family, right? And it's one thing to say it, and it's another to show it. And to me, offering a unique benefit like this demonstrates their commitment to me as a person. Having the ability to offer this to employees is incredible. It's incredible.
And they hit the wall more than a few times. But they demonstrated that if you keep working at it, and importantly, if you have access to the right treatment and care, well, you can ultimately find success. We know that a lot of people have that drive and determination, that resolve to reach their family building goal. But the access is something that can be harder to come by. It's why at Progeny we produce stories like this. We need to share these stories to demonstrate the power of that kind of support and that kind of access, so that going forward, access can be brought to more and more people until truly everyone can get the help that they need. I want to thank Sonya for sharing her story with us. I want to thank you for listening. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to follow Progeny, you can do that at Progeny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progeny. Please remember, this podcast is not intended to substitute for the expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.